Welcome to a free on-demand webinar presented by Michigan Alliance for Families. We partner with experts from across the state to offer live webinars to help answer the questions we encounter most frequently. Our webinars are recorded and archived for future viewing. Handouts for our webinars can be found at michiganallianceforfamilies.org/webinar. Remember to keep up with Michigan Alliance for Families on Facebook and be sure to check out the other videos on our YouTube channel. Follow-up questions to this webinar can be directed to us at info@michiganallianceforfamilies.org. Today's webinar topic is extended school year, and our speaker is Kelly Orginski. Welcome, Kelly.
Hi, Emily. Today we're going to talk about extended school year and all the pieces of it. If you are looking for more in-depth information, we certainly have more on our website. You also can go directly to Michigan Department of Education, and the guidance documents are also there. So know that there's lots more information that you can get as you figure out how to do this thing called extended school year. So extended school year, ESY, is part of the Individuals with Disability Act. It is also part of the Michigan Administrative Rules. You can look up more information for this on the Center for Educational Networking if you're looking to see about the law around it. But you know, the law is kind of that foundational piece that says, yes, extended school year does exist. Really, the extended school year, in my experience, is how do you make the process work for us? How do you embed it in the IEP? How do we make it sure that kids have better outcomes? So an IEP is around access to and participation in the general education curriculum. And the good part about it is there is only one curriculum in the state of Michigan. And so it is around the scope and sequence of learning. So when you're in 3rd grade, what are the social studies? What do you learn next? When you're in 9th grade algebra, what are the things you need to learn next? There's also curriculum for physical education, music, art, computers, library, science, all have curriculums. And so for parents of children who have disabilities and we're looking at writing an IEP, following the curriculum gives us what do they need to learn next. An IEP also covers extracurricular and non-academic activities such as before and after school events and activities, field trips, school assemblies, recess, lunch, transportation to and from school. And oftentimes kids' disability gets in the way of their learning around these kind of non-academic or extracurricular activities. You can certainly have an IEP be doing fine academically, but if the behavior is getting in the way of learning, if you're losing academic time or can't access these 4 components, an IEP might be an individual education program, might be used to help kids learn skills to access these components. This is the IEP process, and we have several webinars and lots of information on our website, along with learning opportunities that take place in communities around the state that really go into depth about what an IEP is. For the conversation that you would use around extended school year, the present level of academic achievement and functional performance is probably the utmost important piece, because that is where we start gathering data around what makes kids eligible for extended school year and what isn't. Where is the baseline data? And so it's really important in conversations around extended school year that you have a well-written PLAF statement by the team that really talks about what are the students' educational needs. Then there's goals and objectives, and the goals and objectives are kind of the skill the student's going to learn. They go together, and so the objective is about what skill is that student going to learn this year. And extended school year is really around those objectives, around maintaining that skill, making sure the skill is embedded so they can continue access the general education curriculum, so time isn't lost around learning, and we'll talk some more about that. Then it's accommodations and modifications, which are kind of the environment or the materials that kids use to access the curriculum and be part of the school day. And then the programs and services is kind of the who. You know, who are those people that support this program? You know, the speech therapist, the physical therapist. It can be others, but this is the process of the IEP, and it's particularly important for extended school year that you have a really good working knowledge of what data, how data works, and how it embeds within the present level statement. When you start talking about extended school year, it's always talking about your child's educational needs. What are the needs for this student? IEPs are written for a year, so we're typically talking a year, although, there's always conversation about, what did last year look like and what does the year, 2 years from now look like. But IEPs are really written for that year. IEPs are written to ensure success around a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. And again, we have resources about those. But extended school year might be one of the tools that helps kids making progress to move forward. And we'll talk about the criteria around that. But really, extended school year needs to also be around FAPE and LRE. When you talk about when your child is not being successful, and I think that is particularly important when you talk about extended school year, whether student needs it or not, and how do we make sure they're continuing to make forward progress within the curriculum, extracurricular, non-academics. So if your child's not being successful, what does that look like? What does that look like? That they are throwing chairs and have to be removed from the classroom, that they're not turning in their homework, that they are raising their voice and running out of the classroom, that they just sit and it doesn't look like they're engaged. So what does it not being successful look like for your child? And then what are the educational needs? As a parent, we know what motivates our kids most likely and keeps them moving and engaged. What is it that helps you get your child to do things or learn new things at home? And are some of those things able to be added into the educational environment? How do you make sure at home when you're teaching a new skill or your child learns a new skill, what do you do that ensures success that keeps them being able to do that, putting the dishes away, getting dressed, whatever that, staying calm, whatever that looks like. So when you're talking about extended school year and the scope of the IEP and your child's not being successful, maybe extended school year is what a child needs to continue to be or to build on their success. So the need for extended school year services, and from my experience, usually it is on like the first or second page of the IEP, and it's a checkbox that gets checkboxed, and nobody really talks about it because no one's really sure about how you have the conversations, and in different places it works differently. But I want to make sure that we're all able to have a conversation about extended school year and what that looks like. So extended school year must be considered for every student with a disability at each IEP meeting. So at least you're talking about extended school year once a year. Whether your IEPs are in the spring or in the fall or somewhere in between, you need to talk about what extended school year would look like. And frequently it might be the parent bringing it up. Well, would my student be eligible for extended school year? And the IEP team said, oh, I don't really think so. I think they're doing fine. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. How do we dig deeper, ask better questions to really talk about what the needs of the student are? There are provision of FAPE, a free and appropriate public education. ESY is part of that. And determined individually. It may not be provided or denied based on a category of disability or a program assessment. So it's not that kids who qualify for special education support and service under autism, they automatically get ESY, or if a kid qualifies underneath learning disability, they don't. It's really a conversation at every single IEP about how extended school year, ESY, would help move a kid forward in accessing the curriculum. So this is kind of how do you bring up the conversation around an extended school year? And so this might be the question that you talk about as an IEP team. Is there one or more current annual goal that address skills which need to be maintained without interruption for the student to benefit meaningfully from FAPE? So is there a skill that if the student, say it's coming up, when Christmas break happens on December 21st and they come back January 4th, is there a skill that we see every time the student comes back, they have to be retaught it, or they don't remember it, or it takes a while for them to be able to do that skill again? So is it multiplication tables? Is it being able to identify consonant blends? Is it being able to sit for more than 3 minutes at a time? Really, it's that kind of, the first question you would ask an IEP team is around, is there a skill that the kid's losing every time they come back? It can be around Christmas break, it could be a weekend, it could be in the summertime. All those are kind of breaks, and how do we maintain that skill so they continue to make forward progress? Because every time that skill has to be relearned, then you've lost time that they could be learning something else. So it's making sure that extended school year is making sure there's not this falling behind. It's maintaining skills to keep the forward progress. So you ask the question, is there skill maintenance that's needed? And if it's no, the annual goals in that area, there's no concern, then you don't need ESY. If there's yes, there's one or more identified goal areas of concern, then the IEP needs to move on. So, goal area could around reading, it could be around math, it could be around behavior, it could be around occupational therapy goals. It's really getting everybody's input in a very clear way about, do you think Kelly's handwriting from when she December 21st and she comes back January 4th and her handwriting is illegible again. And so that maintaining that skill, then it takes another 3 or 4 weeks for her handwriting to get legible again. Those are the kinds of questions you're looking for around skills. When you talk about extended ESY services, a serious potential for regression of skills beyond a reasonable period of recruitment. And that's kind of the only conversation people have. So I hope this webinar helps people think about what are the other ways that we can talk about extended school year and help kids being able to access the curriculum and move forward. So a serious potential for regression of skills beyond a reasonable period of recruitment. And so as an IEP team, there is this whole conversation about what is a serious potential for regression and what is a reasonable period of recruitment. So, serious potential for regression, saying we really think there's been some skills lost. We've seen it over, the weekends. We see it maybe the last year. We really noticed it in 3rd grade and 4th grade. We're still noticing that skill has to be brought up. And then what's a reasonable period of recruitment? I don't think there is a answer for that in terms of what does that look like. I think it's a conversation around, I think 6 weeks is not a reasonable period of recruitment. If you're spending 6 weeks to bring a kid's skills back up to where they were before they were on vacation or over the weekend or over the summer, 6 weeks is a long time in a school period for kids not to be learning new things. And so is it 2 weeks? What does that recruitment look like? And it's very individual. For some kids, the recruitment of a skill can go along while they're continuing to learn new things. For other kids, it's not. And so I think it's really important when you talk about regression and recruitment that it's important that you have a working definition within the IEP team for this particular kid. The other way that extended school year services might be eligible is the nature or severity of the disability. So is the nature or the severity of the disability such that a student needs extended school year services to maintain where they are? It could be a medical disability, it could be some big behavior things going on, but that would be another conversation to have. It's not just regression and recruitment. Regression and recruitment might not be an issue for a student, but the nature or severity might be. So there's a second way to talk about extended school year services. And or is a student at a critical stage or area of learning? Does the data show that this student or that your kid is right at the point where they've really learned a lot and we really don't want to stop the learning because we really feel that they're making some gains, whether it's developmentally they're there, whether the blocks just fell in place for a kid and they're really excelling in reading or whatever that looks like. Are they at that place where if we stopped now, it would take a long time to recoup this, that the team really feels it's important to continue to maintain this so we can continue to build the learning for a student. So when you talk about regression and recoupment, does the data indicate a serious potential? And so what is, how do you start building that? And it's really around building the data. And so asking the question and being able to identify a very specific area of need, and that's why it goes back to a well-written PLAF statement. So what is the area of need? Is it that it's around reading and identifying letters? Is it around one-to-one addition and subtraction? Is it around being able to sit quietly, raise their hand, follow the school rules, hand in you want to be able to start collecting on those specific ones, staying organized, being able to use a planner, whatever that might look like. So it needs to be very specific around what is regression and recruitment for that child. When you ask that when you're having a conversation within the IEP team, what is the nature or severity? How is that impacting breaks during the school year. And so is it a weekend? Can we collect data that shows over the weekend? We see some real, the nature and severity of the disability is such that we need to keep using the same whatever goal, whatever method to keep building. And it could be oftentimes when you talk about nature severity, it's often talked about over summer break, and that's 12 weeks off, and what does that look like for students? A critical area of learning means an area of instruction that is essential to the student's development and achieving self-sufficiency and independence. And I think achieving self-sufficiency and independence could be anything. So self-sufficiency could be reading or math or writing. It could be being able to follow the school rules or pass in the hallway. It's really an individual plan. So when you talk about, we're talking about Kelly, and regression and recoupment isn't so much she's able to get back into the swing and use her skills within 2 weeks, and everybody feels that's an okay time, and it's really not about the nature or severity of the disability, but we're really been working at this year that we're looking at achieving self-sufficiency. She's made some great gains, and we're really feeling that her computer skills are a place where we've spent a lot of time. She's at about 78% of the mastery. We really think that having a time off around this skill, she really needs some support. So it's providing service beyond the normal school year. Will it limit the capacity to keep learning that skill? And so that's really a question, and IEP teams need to be working well together in keeping the focus on what the student needs, because oftentimes conversations we talk about how extended school year will be delivered before we talk about the student's needs. So I think as you move forward as an IEP team, you're always centered around these three questions, and as extended school year, does the student need extended school year, and how would we know? So how do you determine that? Is there a skill that needs to be mastered immediately? If the student does not master the skill immediately, the degree of mastery is likely to be permanently reduced. So are you at that, as the student, at a point where we really need, we've seen some great gains, the data shows the students right there. If we stop, we're afraid that all the time we've spent has been lost, that we feel if there's particularly summertime, those 12 weeks and then the time has been lost. Is that what we're looking at? The student is a critical stage of development where there is a window of opportunity that will be lost if the services are not provided. And I think, when you talk about an IEP team and people being there and talking about what the teacher sees in the classroom, where developmentally are they from the school psychologist or from a social worker, I think we really need a team decision about what those skills look like. But you have to be able to identify what the skills are through the present level of academic achievement and functional performance in order to answer these kinds of questions. Because I think frequently that these kinds of questions just get a polite nod from everybody at the IEP team, including the parents, because we're not quite sure how do we define that. And so is it around computer skills? Is it around reading or writing? How do we really look at the mastery of skills? When you look at extended school years around changes, is there a change in the student's medical, physical, or sensory status that make it possible to predict accelerated rate of learning during the ESY period? So, are we looking at a student who has had some kind of medical procedure or physical, something's changed with how they access the environment, or it could be hearing aids that make it possible that we finally got this in place now. We really need to look at extended school year because we're at that place of learning and we need to continue on that. That if we took the 12 weeks off over the summer, that we would be, the learning might be lost. Is a skill in a crucial area of learning and breaking of services result in a loss of a window of opportunity of mastering that skills? And so it's really the conversation that you need to have with these IEP teams about what is the mastering of a skill. It goes, again, I sound like a broken record, back to the present level, but what is considered mastery of a skill? Tying a shoe, being able to read independently, and as a team, there's what the mastery of the skill, usually it's around 75%, although frequently, because very few of us do everything 100% all the time, except with, things like, crossing the street and being safe, and then we're looking for 100% of the time. So the determination of the need for ESY is based in data. And so how do we start using that data? Where do you get the data from? When you start talking about data sources, and this is, I think, another way that an IEP team might change the conversation with, we really don't know whether Kelly needs we don't know whether she needs extended school year. It might be regression and recruitment. It might be a critical area of learning. We're not really sure. And you can bring this up at any time. You could ask for a team meeting or a new IEP tomorrow to talk about ESY. We'll talk about how that kind of fits in that. But you can start the conversation of ESY at any point in time. It doesn't have to happen at your IEP in April. It really should start. Particularly, it should start before that, because if you're talking about extended school year through the summer, when you talk about April, that might not give enough time to collect these data, to collect the data you need. So data sources may include, but are not limited to, so that's pretty wide open about how and where do we collect data. Progress monitoring data on the IEP goals and objectives, and so if your IEP, if you're living in a place where progress monitoring is done really well, that is the easiest place to look about whether the child's at mastery. It's the easiest place to find regression and recruitment. It's the easiest place to look at data around a critical stage of learning. The data should show where a kid is on any of their IEP goals if progress monitoring is done well, to see if it meets any of those extended school years. And that you might not have been, the team might have not been looking at the data to see if it meets criteria for extended school year, but then we can go back and start really looking at that looks like, or sometimes we might need to change how we're collecting the data to see different things. Data recorded and provided by parents, I think frequently, when we talk about parents being, equal members of the IEP team, parents aren't always real sure how do you bring, what do we bring? And it doesn't have to be, a scientific, document. You can record data at home about how quickly a student finishes their homework. In September it was taking him, 4 hours to finish homework, and by the time we got to January 1st, with some modifications, homework was being done in anywhere up to 15 to 30 minutes. And so providing that kind of just, in a notebook, on a piece of paper, recording that data, that what does that look like? Anxiety before going to school, what does that look like? Parents can provide that, but you want to make sure, it's written, the time, the date, and kind of what that looks like. That's good data to provide. Reports from outside agencies and professionals, I think particularly when you're looking at kids, that third criteria around are they on that edge because of a change in medical or physical, sometimes outside agencies and professionals can provide that. I think students that receive support through mental health, that sometimes the therapist can provide some outside reports around, emerging skills or, really at that cusp. It could be that, they could help around that recruitment and regression around what does that look like for Kelly to recruit those skills, and how does that affect her being able to access the curriculum. Interviews with present and past teachers or service providers and the student. I think that's a good data source that, you talk to the third grade teacher if the kid's in fourth grade, or you talk to the fifth grade teacher of the students in seventh grade and talk to about what did that look like, what did they do to make sure that the student continued to make progress in the curriculum and move forward. I think that's a really important piece. I think if you're talking about extended school year for occupational therapy or speech therapy, it's always good to talk to either service providers that the student might have had in a different school or in a different district, or perhaps outside service providers, about what does that skill look like to them. And mostly around the student, if the student is at any point, I wouldn't even say the student's old enough. Some students have insight to say, yeah, it really takes me forever. Or, I really feel like I'm at a point where I get this, I just need to have a little bit more so I can continue to learn that. The students often have a input of what that looks like. And then again, some students would say, well, I don't really know. Do medical records indicate that the student has experienced significant trauma, making the need for services immediate? I think when you talk about families, for kids that are in foster care, that we need to be talking and looking at what do the services look like to support a kid around educational needs, immediately when there's been some kind of trauma. And so possibly you could be looking at some kind of social work services over the summer or over Christmas break about what does it look like to help a kid work through the trauma in order to be able to continue to make progress in the general education curriculum. Data that indicates continuous or year-round program is an integral part of the teaching methodology used for the student. There are certainly many kids that would benefit from a year-round, making sure that they are continuously taught and retaught whatever skill that is, swallowing, making sure that they could use their assistive technology. You know, was there out there that part of the teaching methodology says the student needs to be constantly reinforced and retaught this? Does our data show that? Is it vocational or pre-vocational assessments? And I think this is a really interesting piece that I've seen in some districts and in some areas work. So we're talking about kids that are at that probably high school, ending high school level, maybe around vocational, pre-vocational assessments that, you know, we're looking at the school year's almost ended. There's an opportunity for some kind of summer work this summer. Do we need to look at using extended school year to do some kind of assessments to keep the kid moving and what skills they have and what skills they need? Medical records that indicate an immediate need for services that cannot wait until after a break. And I don't think I've ever seen this one talked about in an IEP meeting. So would there be medical records that, you know, a student, something happened with a student that if they didn't have extended school year services to maintain their educational needs, that they would be a detriment to them. And so I think that's an interesting one to talk about. I think that it would be hard to talk about because usually if a medical record indicates immediate need for services, some crisis has happened and extended school year might not be the thing that everybody's worried about right then, but certainly something to keep in mind as you move forward to having conversations about extended school year. Data that indicates a loss of access to the job training that will potentially result in a significant delay in mastering critical pre-vocational or vocational skills. I think that when you're talking about this would be if a student was doing some kind of community job, usually within the high school individualization program, and they were working at the local grocery store, but they still needed job coaching or support for that summer or for the 2 weeks at Christmas time. If they didn't have that support to do the job, they would lose their job. And so certainly extended school year services, we would be talking about that because it's about maintaining those vocational skills. Is it around professional peer-reviewed literature in the goal area of concern that provides research substantiating a critical stage in learning, and this learning must occur without delay? You know, is it around a reading program, or is it perhaps around some new behavior program that a student is really having success in, that it's been peer reviewed and say this is the way it works, and by not having that continued support of extended school year, it'll be lost. And so I think those are another interesting one to talk about. Development standards within the goal area of concern that indicate the student is at a critical stage of learning. And I think that one would take a lot of conversation from an IEP team. You know, development standards, who usually has the development standards? You know, frequently the school psychologists would have them, perhaps the school social worker would have them. Some teachers might know those development standards within a goal area, and then be able to identify, if you can identify the standards, if you're looking at data and where is that student, you know, is that when you're looking at the critical stage of learning, is the student at, you know, 80% with that critical stage of learning? So again, a good conversation to have, but we need to be able to have an IEP team that talks about, well, you know, who knows the development standards and how do we know where the student is falling on those standards of learning? When you're talking about determination of ESY services may not be based on a formula or policy. Both lack individualization of unique needs of a student with disabilities. And I think oftentimes IEPs are conducted as a, you know, it's just checked on the IEP box and you keep moving on. Or sometimes in some areas there is a thought that, well, kids that are emotionally impaired, they don't qualify for ESY. Or kids that have cognitive impairments, then, you know, no, you know, that's not how the policy that we have. And I've been doing this a long time, and so it used to be certain areas of qualification always got ESY. And probably 5 or 6 years ago, we really looked at how we're doing extended school year based on some federal guidance and said we really need to talk about each student as a unique learner, which I think puts a lot back on the IEP team to not only gather data, but to really know a student and their individual education program around where those critical areas of development are, what are the research-based it puts a lot, it puts a whole different conversation on it. And if your IEP is on Thursday from 2 to 2:45, extended school year, that conversation is not going to happen within those 45 minutes. And so I think it is in everybody's best interest that if we're talking about extended school year for a student, that perhaps we have a pre-meeting, or we have a meeting after the IEP, or it is a conversation, because we want to be able to look at all the criteria that a student may or may not meet, and then you want to look at all the possible places where we could look at data around development and what good moving forward, always keeping in mind that it's based on the student's needs and accessing the general education curriculum. Non-academics and extracurriculars. And so I think that's part of the conversation where you want to start that, but it certainly ESY cannot happen within that 45-minute or to an hour IEP that's often scheduled. So you really want to be able to make a request to the IEP team, or the IEP, we really need to set aside some time to talk about this. So it could be a conference call, it could be face-to-face. I think for some people it could be done through email, really talking about what does that look like. I don't know whether if you're starting when you first starting a conversation about ESY, it could be brought up at the IEP and say, I really think that Kelly would benefit from extended school year, and I know that we only have 45 minutes today. Could we set another time so we could talk about this? And does the whole IEP team need to be there? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it's a conversation between a couple people, and then you bring the IEP team together. Some places might say, yep, we need to reconvene the IEP to have this conversation. It's really, you really have to figure out how that works within the function of an IEP team, but knowing that it is individual for each student and it needs to be talked about for each student. And so, in my experience, all of a sudden a parent hears from another parent that extended school year is available. The IEP is the middle of April, and all of a sudden, the parent's saying, well, I think, Kelly would benefit from extended school year. It doesn't give people time to really talk about that, so you need to be ready that if you're going to start talking about extended school year, that now you're ready to have a conversation about it, and you're ready to talk about more than recruitment and regression. You need to talk about the 3 areas that a student might benefit, and then all the areas that you might collect data from. So you have a well-written present level of functional academic performance and academic achievement and functional performance. You have looked at the 3 different criteria a student may qualify for extended school year, and 1, maybe 2, a student qualifies for. You've looked at all the ways to collect data, and people are pretty sure where the student is achieving on any given goal or objective area, that you're really thinking this is a critical area of need to maintain this skill in order to continue to make forward progress in the general education curriculum, non-academic and extracurriculars. So where is it provided? Extended school year can be provided in a variety of ways, and I've seen some very creative ways that extended school year has been provided. And so I just want to give us a place that we can talk about, and when you're talking to your IEP team, where does this happen? So it could be in a traditional classroom. I've seen extended school year sometimes it's just hooked right in with whatever summer school, quote unquote, is happening within a district. That extended school year is just added into that summer school program with maybe some modifications or different supports, and it's happening just in that traditional kind of summer school classroom. School-based programs that vary in the length of schedule. So, it could be that given that objective that needs to be maintained, it could be that it's not 5 days a week, 3 hours a day. It could be 2 days a week for an hour and a half to maintain that goal so the student can continue to make forward progress in the curriculum. It could be around daily instruction of specific goal areas. We could look at that we really need to make sure that there's daily instruction. So it's, it could be with the age of technology, it could be students hooking into some kind of instruction on the computer every day throughout the summer, or the Christmas break, or even weekends. It could be some small group instruction. I've seen districts where they looked at the students' needs around extended school year, and they put kids together, great groups, sometimes on needs, sometimes by age, sometimes on location, and kind of did the instruction, in groups of 3 to 5, very individualized for a period of time, usually, again, during the summertime. It could be 1 or more related services like community recreation program, and again, I've seen some really creative ways people have done extended school years, extended school providing services within some like community camps that were going on around some social, when kids needed to maintain social skills, that they were able to hook into some community recreation programs in the summertime or some library programs that might support that. So, you know, if that creativity is related to using some of those community recreation programs, the IEP team and the school and family would need to support how would that work for the student, because for some students that just wouldn't work. It could be cooperative programs with our other agencies in some areas in the state, the Community Mental Health, the Department of Human Services, Michigan Rehab Services, some nonprofits really work well around running different programs, reading programs, social, emotional programs. So maybe it's looking at what else is in the community to hook into extended school year for a student, and how does that look, and what does transportation look like, and what does support look like, so we're moving forward to making sure we're maintaining those skills. It could be some kind of intra-school cooperative program from one ISD to another, one school district to another, that, you know, in one school district they really don't have the programming that's happening, again, usually in the summertime for the student, but the next district does. So maybe we talk about, hey, it's just happening over the next district. How do we make sure that the student can access that programming to maintain those skills to move forward? It could be consultation from a job coach, and that was some of those criteria we talked about those pre-vocational or vocational skills, that it could be continuing to make sure that the skills are maintained, that a job coach is there to maintain those skills. You know, what does that job coach look like? The reality of it is that lots of job coaches that work within the school district, they would have summers off. And so is there somebody within the school district that would want to continue to support a student, and how would that look like to make sure that happened? It could be intensive short-term instruction at various points in the summer months to prevent regression, and I have seen this, again, work some really creative ways. A student was at a critical point around computer skills and being able to really independently use a computer to access the curriculum. And so the team decided that once a week, for like 8 weeks in the summertime, not the 12 weeks, that the student met for like an hour and a half, and it happened to be with the computer person who ran the programs, and they just met at the local library just to make sure that the skills were, it was kind of like almost like a quiz, you know, once a week, that the student the teacher put the student through to make sure that those skills were maintained where they needed to be, so the regression wasn't all relearning in the fall, and I thought that was a really interesting way to do it. A week of intense review just prior to the beginning of the school year. Again, I think a really unique way to look at that the student, we've identified with the student that if you review, do that kind of pre-learning, that pre-loading of it, that they're able to remember it, access it, get those skills up to where they need to be, so when they start the school in September, they're ready to go. Particularly kids with anxiety. I mean, all kids have anxiety. We all have anxiety about when school starts. But for kids that that intensive review might be a real benefit for a kid, so when they start that first day of school, they already know what's going to happen, they know the routines, they know what the expectations are. That might be a really nice use of extended school year when we look at a child and those critical needs of learning, or the recruitment and regression around that. And home-based programs that include parent training, and I haven't seen this one used very often, perhaps around like positive behavior supports, that when we look at a student being at a critical area of learning, that they're really starting to understand positive behavior supports and what that looks like, that maybe there's a component that we look at extended school year to make sure it's happening every day with anybody in the student's life. I think that's a really interesting one. I haven't seen it used very often, but I could see some real implications, positive implications for that one. So when you talk about extended school year and related services, so related services are occupational therapy, social work, speech therapy, any of those related services. Transportation and supplemental aids and services must be considered, as well as instructional programming. And so, you know, once we've identified the student's need for extended school year by one of those three criteria, once we've talked about how and where and what are the, you know, short-term, once a week, community ed, how do you do that? Then you need to talk about, you know, is there occupational therapy that needs to be added in there for learning to keyboard, or continuing to keyboard. You know, around transportation, what does that look like? You know, who's responsible for transportation? How is the student going to get to the library? You know, what does that look like? Supplementary aids and services, you know, is there an e-reader that's needed, or some other kind of support that looks, as well as that instructional program. You know, if a student is used to learning material both by have it read to them or on tape, you know, if you're expecting to extended school year to continue to maintain those skills, then we need to look at what does that look like and make sure that the student is still being instructed in the way that they always, that they're used to learning. So when you talk about extended school year, least restrictive environment, it's not identical to the LRE requirements for the normal school year. It is different because extended school year can be delivered differently. That 1 week intense, that once, you know, it can be, so the LRE is a little bit different. Schools are not required to create a new program. So when you talk about extended school year, and I've not seen this happen very much when you've really had good conversations about extended school year. It's not about necessarily creating a new program. It's about looking at that student's needs and how, with the resources we have, do we continue to support the student to maintain where they are. Not prohibited from providing services in a non-educational setting, in that, you know, the library within community rec centers, those kinds of things. That extended school year can happen in other places, and in some places I see it very creative and people do that a lot, and then other places they're like, nope, we're gonna, you know, set it up in the, you know, this junior high school, and that's where all our extended school year services are happening this summer. Which, you know, yes, it makes it easy. It doesn't meet your students' needs most, maybe, but you'd want to be talking about what does that look like. You know, if a student has huge anxiety that keeps them from learning, and it's about entering the school building, perhaps having extended school years in the school building is not the best place for it. Maybe the anxiety reduction, that kind of stuff, would be better to have it at the library or someplace else. Again, individual education program. It needs to be considered a flexible service model, and I think sometimes we forget this, and people start the conversation on extended school year thinking about being an inflexible service model. And so I think that a flexible service model is kind of that, you know, we need to figure out what the student needs, and we have lots of ways to meet the student's needs once they qualify for by one of those 3 criteria. And once we look at where the data shows, we can look about how we meet the student's needs and how is that done. It is not a one-size-fits-all. It's truly an individual education program when it comes to extended school year, but as you can see, it takes a lot of conversations to really put all the pieces together. So you need to remember that extended school year provider only for those annual goals identified as areas of concern which are not, that are determined to require ESY. So first, this might be, you know, what areas are we concerned for Kelly's learning? Extended school year services are not intended to duplicate all services provided during the normal school year for most students who required ESY. So it's not a duplication. It is saying this is an area of concern. We really feel that we need to have extended school year services to maintain this so the student can make forward progress. New annual goal areas are not developed for ESY services, and ESY services are based on first identifying an existing annual goal area of concern and then determining the services. And I think I've seen conversations go really off track when they start talking about that because they didn't have a good, well-written PLAF statement, and the goals were not specific enough, so we couldn't get the data. And so we talked about the student needing extended school year, and they're starting to make new things up. And so we want to make sure that extended school year is not about making new things up. It's about supporting through the data and the need of the child what extended school year services and how do we get those delivered in kind of that flexible model. Considerations for extended school year needs to be made in a timely manner, and I think this is what trips really people up a lot, that you get thinking about extended school year. And so a parent, you leave 5th grade and the summer's hard for whatever reason is, there's a lot of makeup time, the student's really not into a learning groove until right before Christmas, you get off at Christmas, getting back into whatever their needs are doesn't happen to the end of January, and the parent goes, okay, good, at this IEP, in the middle of April, we're going to talk about extended school year services. I think it puts pressure on the entire IEP team to talk about April, about what's going to happen May, and school's out in June. And so while it needs to be talked about in a timely manner, it doesn't have to be at that April IEP. You can start having those conversations in September about what's going to happen the following, either, Christmas, spring break, summer, what does that look like? It is obligated at every IEP meeting, and again, I think that we often just check the box and move on because nobody's quite sure how to guide the conversation. So I'm hoping that this webinar will provide people with at least some guiding questions to start having conversations about extended school year. No deadline for proposed ESY services without an IEP, and so there is no, well, if it's not, if it's not done by this, then you won't get extended school year services. I used to hear districts say that all the time. Well, any team that's putting in for extended school year, they need to have it in by March 1st. Well, that doesn't always work, and indeed, it's not supported by the rules and regs that way. A timely manner to determination of the need for ESY services should be accomplished in sufficient time to make plans for the delivery of extended school year services. And so that puts a lot of pressure on teams if you're not starting to talk about it until April about what services, where's the data, how do they qualify, what are the concerns. So it really is sufficient time to deliver this. And so I think as an IEP team, if a member of the team and a parent in particular talks about extended school year and they said, I'd really like to talk about it in September, and everybody goes, oh, we'll talk about it in April, I think that that's not in anybody's best interest to do it that way. To permit any party to exhaust administrative remedies, mediation, facilitated IEP, due process complaints, hearings, and state complaints if there is a difference in opinion prior to the break in services. And that's really where I think the conversations need to start. That if the parent thinks knowing the criteria and said, I think, really Kelly needs extended school year services, and the IEP team says, well, we're not going to talk about it until the middle of April, and you get to the middle of April at the IEP and you can't agree, that doesn't give you much time to request mediation or get a facilitated IEP or file a state complaint, because there are often timelines around some of those. And so, the rules and regs say permit any party to exhaust administrative remedies. Well, that might be a conversation you have, that I know we're not going to agree on extended school year, and talking about it in April isn't going to give us time to do mediation or get a facilitator in here. Or, we know we disagree, so let's make sure we have a facilitator in here for this IEP to talk about extended school year. You want to be aware that that the timeliness shouldn't be what stops extended school year from happening or the conversations from happening. So now what? ESY services are not known. If extended school year services are not known at the annual IEP, then identify a date to reconvene. So if you talked about them in April and everybody goes, we'll talk about them next April, I think perhaps you should ask to have a team meeting or reconvene an IEP to talk about extended school year services. You could write an IEP in April that says in the IEP that we're going to reconvene in the first week of October to talk about extended school year services as part of that IEP. Decide what data needs to be gathered and to assist in making the decisions. If you're talking about the IEP in April and you don't know whether Kelly really we're not sure this year whether extended school year, what kind of data would a parent be collecting over the summer? So when you have a meeting in October, you can talk about what that learning looked like. So what do we need to make decisions that we're not sure about what Kelly's reading, regression, and recruitment are? So are we collecting data over the weekends, over spring break, over long weekends? What does that look like? And what services may need to be provided? I mean, there's always that conversation. If it's the area of need and concern, is it around speech therapy or occupational therapy or another service? What does that look like? A teacher consultant, what does that look like? So those are considerations when you're talking about how do we start, and that these can be added as an addendum to the IEP. That ESY certainly could be an addendum to the IEP if it is all working well, and a parent has to agree to an addendum. If it makes sense to say we're going to identify a date to reconvene and we're gathering this data, that's fine. But you want to make sure that it is working. It's working to move you forward. So this is the Michigan Alliance for Families. Please don't hesitate to get a hold of us. We're here to help.
Thank you, Kelly. Michigan Alliance for Families is an IDEA grant-funded initiative of the Michigan Department of Education, Office of Special Education, and we're Michigan's Federal Parent Training and Information Center, funded by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs. Follow-up questions to this webinar can be directed to us at info@MichiganAllianceForFamilies.org.